Cian Corla. So there's no argument that this is a big budget. €86 billion overall expenditure, an increase of €4 billion in health spending, €19 billion borrowing next year. Some of the spending is unnecessary, particularly the corporate welfare. There is a fair amount of necessary spending that's not included in the budget. Housing is a big one in relation to that. Most of the spending is completely necessary and justifiable. But many workers will worry, who is going to pay for all of this? Many will wonder, if Mr Keynes is being welcomed in the front door next year, will Mr Friedman be knocking on the door in 2022 or 2023? I believe that the spending splurge needs to be paid for by those who profited most from the COVID crisis, who also happen to be those in society who are best able to afford to pay for it, namely the super rich. The UBS Bank estimates that billionaires increased their wealth 27.5% globally between April and July, at precisely the time when tens of millions of working people lost their jobs and were pushed into poverty. A 10% levy on the profits of the big pharmaceutical companies and the private hospitals in this state would raise an extra €2 billion. A 1.5% levy on the richest 5% in this state, leaving aside their first €1 million, would raise €3.8 billion. Actually collecting corporation tax at 12.5% would raise a multiple of that, because 34% of corporations pay zero tax in this society. 32% pay less than $20,000, less than the income tax paid by some workers in this country. Actually collecting corporation tax at 12.5% could raise up to an extra €20 billion. And I think corporation profits tax shouldn't be 12.5%. I think it should be 25%. There's a vast amount of wealth there, and no need for working people to pay for this in 2 years' time with austerity, with tax increases or with cutbacks. Now, I want to make a couple of points about youth unemployment, because I think this is going to be an increasing issue in our society, and I want to raise some questions about the measures the government have adopted in relation to it. If you take the number of under 25s who are officially unemployed and the numbers who are on the pandemic payment, you'd come to close to 100,000 people. The government suggests that tackling this through a programme of apprenticeships and training. I'm all in favour of training, but I'm not in favour of so-called training, which is a cover for exploitation and cheap labour. I think we need a lot more discussion about Skill Connect. And I think Skill Connect is something we're going to be hearing a lot more about in the next while. 80,000 training places and internships in cybersecurity, software programming, med tech, digital marketing, customer services, etc. But what are those young people going to be paid? An internship which provides for 24 hours work, that young person, I understand, is to be paid €229. But the job seeker's allowance is €203. So in other words, is the government saying that in return for 24 hours work, that a company must top up their pay by €26? That's €1.08 per hour. That's worse than the scandal that we had in relatively recent years with JobBridge. We need decent training with decent pay, decent conditions and trade union rights. And it looks to me from this proposal the government are aiming to go down a very different road. Young people are also a large cohort of the people in this state who are on minimum wage. The government is proposing an increase of 10 cents an hour. That's an increase of less than 1%. Low-paid workers, many of them young, were among the heroes of the COVID crisis and the lockdown earlier this year. They were the people who did the retail jobs, the cleaning jobs, delivered your pizzas, and so on. Now, there's a thing in this country called the living wage. There's a group comes together to estimate what it is every year. It's a decency threshold, a standard below which it's estimated it's not possible to have a decent life, decent standard of living in this country. I think the latest figure for it was €12.30. So what the government are proposing is that the lowest paid workers in this country would live on more than €2 an hour, less than that next year. That's a scandal. The minimum wage should be €15 an hour, and I would encourage low-paid workers and young workers to get organised and to challenge the government's low-pay agenda. Count Corla, I sat in court number 3 at the High Court this morning. I saw an injunction being granted to KPMG against ex-Debenhams workers. In my opinion, that injunction is a blow against the right to picket effectively. I believe that those ex-Debenhams workers will not roll over. I think they will carry on a campaign of effective picketing. And I think that effective picketing means, as a result of this injunction, that many of them, overwhelmingly women, may find themselves in the days and weeks to come before the High Court and threatened with the prospect of the jailhouse. Now, they are very, very clear in relation to this. They lay the blame for that situation on this government, at the door of the Fianna Fáil party in particular, and the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, in particular, because they feel, and they're right to feel this, that they have failed to seize the opportunities in recent months, and in the last month in particular, to resolve this dispute. And the budget represents another missed opportunity. The state could and should have set aside €10 million in this budget, factored it in for budget 2021 to address the just demands of the workers, to step aside from the state's claim over €20 million and say half of that can go to resolve this claim. They failed to do so, and I fear that we'll see the consequences of that in the days and weeks to come. Brief final points, I might return to these later. Extraordinary that a tax is not just being increased to €750 per tonne, but is being increased and written into legislation that it will be increased year on year from here to 2030. The carbon tax is a regressive tax. There's nothing progressive against this measure. We'll return to this issue. And the final point, there was one ICU bed available in the CUH in Cork yesterday at 6:30 p.m, one of just 33 critical care beds available in the state. Do you honestly believe that increasing funding to allow the number of ICU beds rise from 255 to 321 is going to adequately deal with the crisis that this country and our health service are facing over the next period of time? It falls very, very far short, and this is an issue that we will be returning to very shortly as well.